Okay, we're getting to part 2 of chapter 1. And I last stopped off on this slide of part 1, chapter 1. I broke them up into 2 sections because the first part was 45 minutes long, talking about the early sociologists. So now we're going to get into a little bit more basic applied and public sociology, and then we're going to talk about the sociological theories for this intro to sociology class. Once again, I'm Professor Jerry Logan. So we're going to go ahead and get started and talk about basic, applied, and public sociology. Basic sociology is analyzing some aspect of society only just to gain the knowledge. So you have people who are sociologists, and how do they plan to use sociology? They also, and these are positions that people hired, they work in this capacity as a sociologist, or where they may be a contributing factor. I believe it was Dr. Henry Gates. He worked with some of the, remember Colin Kaepernick when he began to do the protests, and when he played for the San Francisco 49ers, they have certain sociologists that work with them, to some of the professional athletes, to be able to help them through some of the things that they're going through. So there are different roles and capacities of being a sociologist as well. Applied sociology, you use in sociology to solve problems, and public sociology, you're using a sociological perspective for the benefit of the public. So make sure we're going to talk about this a little bit more. Basic sociology analyzes some aspect of society, and they're publishing, sociologists are publishing their findings in books and sociology journals. Sociological research for the purpose of making discoveries about life in human groups, not for making changes in those groups. So again, that is basic sociology. Applied sociology, you're using sociology to solve some problems from the micro level, the smaller level of the classroom, interaction, and family relationships, to the macro level of crime and pollution, on the larger scale, the macro level. And then there's public sociology. The ASA, American Sociological Association, is promoting a middle ground between research and reform, applying sociology to the public good, especially the use of the sociological perspective, how things are related to one another, to guide politicians and policymakers. So a politician or policymakers may go to sociologists in trying to figure out how can they do the public good, and making sure if they're trying to resolve any type of problems that's going on in society, as well, as far as from a politician's and policymakers' point of view. So that is basic, applied, and public sociology. Again, here's a figure 1.3 that talks about basic, public, and applied sociology. Basic again, fellow sociologists. The audience is a fellow sociologist and anyone interested. Product is knowledge. Public sociology, the audience is the policymakers, product recommendations. And applied sociology is the audience, the clients, into product change. So I give you a few moments to look over this particular slide so you can learn more about basic, public, and applied sociology. Okay, next slide. Let's see, I skip over one. Theories. So now we're going to get into the theories. A theoretical perspective in sociology. The theories are huge in sociology. If you've taken any introduction sociology course, any sociology course, period, there are a number of different theories that you will learn. And in my class in particular, throughout the remaining chapters, we're going to have a lot of different theories. So my suggestion is you get to know these sociological theories. So the definition of a theory is a general statement about how some parts of the world fit together and how they work, an explanation of how two or more facts are related to one another. Sociologists use three major theories: symbolic interactionism, the functional analysis or structural functionalism, and the conflict theory. Now, these three particular theories are going to be on all three exams. And my students over the last 7 to 8 years have been using these three theories in their written assignments as well. So the bottom line is that each particular, as we go on to each chapter, so if we talk about crime and delinquency, each theory of these theories have a perspective. Race and ethnicity, marriage and family, sex and gender. So there's these theories, globalization, also social stratification. So these different theories, these three theories are consistent and they have their point of view. So through each of the remaining PowerPoint presentations in each chapters of the book, I will be explaining more on how to use these theories. But today, I'll give you a sample on how they are used based upon on divorce and marriage. So currently right now, I just wanted you to be familiar. I'm going to go over each one of these three theories. Make sure you pay attention because these three theories will be on the first exam, the second exam, and the third exam, but they will be applied to a particular situation or particular chapter. Symbolic interactions, again, the functional analysis, conflict theory we'll be talking about, putting them in theoretical perspectives together, and their level of analysis is macro and micro. George Herbert Mead, we'll talk about a little bit more about him in Socialization chapter. He's one of the founders of Symbolic Interactionism, a major theoretical perspective in sociology. He taught at the University of Chicago, where his lectures were popular. They say although he wrote little, after his death, students compiled his lectures into an influential book, The Mind, Self, and Society. So we'll talk about him a little bit more in the chapter of socialization. Charles H. Cooley, also we're going to talk about him as well, socialization, the looking glass self. He is one of the founders of symbolic interactionism as well. So let's talk about the definition of symbolic interactionism. Now, whenever I see a word, I always look at the words and try to break it down and what does it mean. Symbolic, symbol, take off the IC, symbol, interactionism, interacting. So you're interacting with symbols. Symbols, again, the definition that things that we attach meaning to. In the symbolic interactionists look at the symbols and they say they are the key to understanding how we view the world and how we communicate with one another. So we communicate, interact through symbols. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. A theoretical perspective in which society is viewed as composed of symbols that people use to establish a meaning. They develop their views of the world and communicate with one another. Symbolic interactions, they study face-to-face interaction. They examine how people make sense out of life and how they determine relationships. So if we're communicating through the use of symbols, we have a better idea of just our everyday life when we look at interacting through symbols. If you're driving a car, you're driving, everybody does not have to communicate who's driving a car. There are symbols in place to let us know what we're supposed to do. There are traffic lights, stop sign, there's yield signs. So there's a bunch of different symbols that we use that we are able to communicate without even conversing. Hopefully people know how to drive good and obey these symbols and these, so they don't get a ticket or cause an accident. However, these are the symbols that we use. You can communicate also with where we wear, like if you see a priest collar, this person of a religious point of view. When you see a wedding band, that person is married. So there's a symbol, okay, that person is attached, that person is married. Also, the way we communicate in the symbolic interactions, they study face-to-face interaction, and they do study on the micro level. They look at how people make sense out of life and how we determine relationships. We determine relationships in the level of the respect that goes with it. For instance, if this is your aunt, uncle, grandmother, grandparents, extended family members, there's different titles that we show respect to based upon, we look at the relationship to how they relate to us based upon the symbols that they have and what it means to us. So, more information on the symbolic interactionism is the fact that when we communicate through symbols, we can use hand gestures, facial expressions, and how we can know what a person is thinking, body movement. These are things you study with face-to-face interaction, the symbolic interactionists are referring to. So therefore, again, it's like you have an understanding of we really don't have to verbally talk, but therefore we communicate through symbols. But and throughout, I just want you all to get the basic understanding as scholarly thinkers that you all continue to do research on what it is as well. But try to provide another video that kind of explains more about the symbolic interactionism. So I want to try to upload another video that talks about each one. Just want to kind of briefly talk about it a little bit and have you understand what it means. So before I get to this one, another way we think about this, how do we use symbolic interactionism today? So in my class, a lot of times I talk to my students, and one of the biggest ways that they communicate through day is through the use of symbols. They look at through their cell phones. Everybody has a cell phone, and younger people and other people communicate to each other based on emojis, and I think it's GIF, GIF, I hope I'm pronouncing it right. The use of emojis and GIF is a way for students and people to interact with each other. Like some young people, some people who use it, they can have a whole conversation just based upon the emojis. They can just put emojis and that is it. And you can have a communication. I don't know, I'm still learning, but for another younger group of people, a particular subculture, they don't have to put no words, they can just put straight emojis in there and they understand what they mean. And I laugh with some of my students. I tell them a story that I had a young lady in my class, and she stated that she's like 18, 19 years old, young lady. She went through her boyfriend's phone, his cell phone, trying to find something. She said, I'm trying to see if he got other girls and stuff. And when she looked in her phone, she noticed that next to her name in his cell phone, he had a heart and a lock with a key. And she was like, well, he loved me. And she like, that's all I need to see. She said she put the phone down. She didn't know he had it in there. She said that she really loved her. And based upon that emoji. So people can use facial emojis, different things to communicate. But that would be one of the ways that symbolic interactions would say that the use of symbols that you can use as a way to communicate. I don't want to spend all day on this, but I just want to give you an idea about it, which of course, symbolic interactionism will be on the exam. And feel free to continue to study scholarly thinking as far as, doing independent research as well. But I'm going to try to provide some more information, a video, something that I can upload that give you more information on symbolic interactionism. I don't know why I keep skipping. How people use symbols in everyday life, applying symbolic interactionism. We're going to look at the changing meaning of symbols that affects expectations. And we're looking at the symbol of marriage. Back in the day, and I talked to a lot of my students, and you got older, back in the 1800s, early 1900s, people were getting married at a young age, 18, 19 years old, and they were married for a lot of years. And I've had students, I always ask them, I say, well, how do you know anyone who's been married more than 30 years? And they raise their hand and tell me about somebody. 40 years, 50 years, and some people have grandparents or older people that they know who've been married 60 years. So there's a potential if you're 19 and 20 years old. So if you're 20 years old, you got married back then, you were there for life. The expectation and the symbol of marriage was sacred in that you're staying together forever. And it's possible, don't get me wrong now, but there are people who have been married 40, 50, 60 years. If you think about your own particular family, you'll be able to see and say, man, ask some of the family members, how long you all been married? What kept you all together? And I think it's a good way to learn about that. But the meaning of marriage has changed nowadays. Divorce has changed because back then divorce was not much of an option. It was frowned upon and it was looked down upon. So people have been married for 40, 50, 60 years. The idea of divorce was like, no, we can't get a divorce. We're married, and that is a symbol of marriage. But the symbol of divorce has changed, and now to a lot of people it's seen as a newfound freedom. People are celebrating their divorce. People are having parties, and they went, they at the parties at the club celebrating because they celebrated divorce, and they're free from this person, free from that person. So now divorce is kind of looked at as like, good, I'm out of this marriage, I'm done with this, and it's time to celebrate. And some people are sad, but some people are happy, and they've been divorced for a very short time. I've talked to some of my students. What's the shortest time? Have anybody been divorced within 5 years? 2 years. And one young lady said that her friend was 21 and her husband was 22, and they were only married like 2 months. You know, they just got a divorce quickly. But if you think about the meaning of divorce and marriage, maybe 100 years ago, or saying years ago like that, that was not even an option. They were that young, but they still had to stay married. So just giving you all how the symbols affect expectations now. The meaning of parenthood has changed. People don't want to get too much into that, but the parenthood, you know, you have the responsibility of raising your child. I have a beautiful 19-year-old daughter, and it's like you have to continue to be a parent no matter how old they become. It's not like, and I've read recently in the papers on the internet, on the internet about one lady who had 6 or 7 kids, and she was mad that Department of Children and Family Services, she was happy the Department of Children and Family Services took her kids away. And she said she wanted to celebrate because, in fact, she don't have to deal with that anymore. She don't have time to be a parent. So a lot of people are pushing the kids off on the grandparents, their kids off on the grandparents, because of the fact it's too much. I need a break. I can't do this. I still want to party. I still want to hang out. But parenthood is not the responsibility of the grandparents. If this is your child, raise your child the best way you can. If there's no other conditions, medical or mental health, anything like that. But don't look at the parenthood as like, okay, these are my kids, but I need a break from them. I don't want to be a parent no more. About the sad situation of the young lady who was happy that Department of Children and Family Services took her kids away and put them in foster care, so she went out and partied and celebrated, which is the meaning of parenthood have definitely changed. The meaning of love has changed, the expectations. I'm going to get into that a little bit later in my chapter of marriage and family. I'm going to go through all that stuff and the meaning of love, how that symbol has changed as well. So just giving you a sample of how symbolic interactionism is used. Look at the divorce rate and the marriage rate. You see 1890 compared up to 2020. We see there's a rise and a decline over the years. So if you kind of look at this section as it started to go on its decline, we're just trying to take a look at the U.S. marriage and the U.S. divorce rate. The functional analysis perspective, also called the structural functionalist perspective. Society is a whole unit. And look at society as a whole unit made up of interrelated parts that work together. For example, they look at the parts of everything is supposed to work together. I'm not a science major, but if something internally, your heart starts working, the blood starts pumping, and it throws off the whole equilibrium of your body. So they look at society as this interrelated parts that should be working together as a functioning whole. Robert Merton, we'll talk about him a little bit later in Crime and Deviance, where he talks about strain theory. He spent most of his academic career at the Columbia University. He was a major proponent of functionalism, one of the main theoretical perspectives in sociology. So I talk about Robert Merton later. We talk about strain theory. Functional analysis, the structural functionalist perspective, is that society is a whole unit made up of interrelated parts that work together. It is a theoretical framework in which society is viewed as composed of various parts. Each part has a function that, when fulfilled, contributes to society's equilibrium. I repeat, I'm going to let that marinate for you. A theoretical framework in which society is composed of various parts. Each part has a function that, when fulfilled, contributes to society's equilibrium. Merton used the term functions to refer to the beneficial consequences of people's actions. Functions help keep a group, society's social system in balance. Dysfunctions are consequences that harm a society. They undermine the system's equilibrium. So for my exam, make sure you understand functions and dysfunctions and understand the functionalist perspective. Functions are either manifest or latent. Manifest in actions that is intended to help some part of a system. Latent human actions that can hurt a system. Such consequences are unintentional. So they look at sociologists who use the functionalist perspective, stress how industrialization and urbanization undermine the traditional functions of the family. Before industrialization, members of the family worked together as an economic unit, as is pictured in 1890s. So think about it. If it's in this particular picture, everybody's working together. The mother's at home, the wife is at home, the husband at home, kids at home. So everybody's working together as a group. We all working together. Wife is next to me, the husband's there, the kids are there, and they all working together. As production moved away from the home, as we talked about previously before industrialization, more recently, it took away the father. So we talked about the Industrial Revolution. As I used the example earlier, as I'm on the farm and we're working husband and wife, and we're not making no money. The industries are changing down in the bigger cities, and there's factories that are being built. We need to eat. I need to take care of my family. So that's why it says production moved away from the home. It took with it first the father. So me being the father, the husband, I have to leave the household, and we're no longer functioning as a unit anymore as we used to, because of the fact we were used to seeing each other every day. We was used to trying to make money together, and now all of a sudden I'm out the home. Then all of a sudden, more recently, then the mother came out the home as well. So the father got to work, now the mother got to work. We're no longer around each other as we used to be back in the day. So one's consequence is a major dysfunction. There's weakening of family ties. So therefore, even today, the husband go to work 9 to 5, she goes to work 9 to 5. They come home, there's little time for the kids, there's little time for each other. This is a Monday through Friday, or they work different shifts, or his job requires that he needs to go out of town for business meetings, or her job. So that's one of the functions to say that it becomes a dysfunctioning, because it's now weakening the family ties. Let's go back. Sorry about this thing keeps skipping. So we're going to talk about the conflict theory. Conflict theory, we talked about before with Karl Marx. I always say when you think of conflict theory, think of Karl Marx. It's a theory propounded by Karl Marx that claims societies in a state of perpetual conflict due to competition for limited resources. It holds that social order is maintained by domination and power. Just don't worry about the rather than, that's a typo. So it holds that social order is maintained by domination and power. Conflict theory states that tensions and conflicts arise when the resources, status, and power are unevenly distributed between groups in a society, and that these conflicts become the engine for social change. In this context, power can be understood as the control of material resources and accumulated wealth, control of politics, and the institutions, as we talked about before, that make up society and one's social status relative to others, determined not just by class, but by race, gender, sexuality, culture, and religion, among other things. The conflict theory. Some people say that if I was a conflict theorist, I would look at how persons in position of power and authority are working to maintain that power and authority. And what do? Is they put a system in place that benefits themselves in order to them to maintain their prestige as well as maintain their power of others. So if I have power and wealth, I want to maintain it. And I don't want to lose it. So therefore, I have to look at what would be a threat to me that would take away my power. And there becomes the inequalities that would exist, especially when it comes to social class as well. So if I'm rich and powerful, then therefore I'm going to look out for my rich and powerful friends. It gets real deep. I'm going to talk about that more and more. I'm just giving you a brief understanding of the conflict theory, what the definition is, and I'm going to apply it more and more as each chapter we discuss. Conflict theories will describe divorce. It's usually the same thing, marriage and divorce. They say divorce is the competition for resources and power within the marriage where both parties cannot come to an agreement. From the conflict perspective, then our high divorce rate does not mean that marriage has weakened, but rather that women are making headway in their historical struggle with men. So if we look at power as a source of conflict in a marriage, historically men had more power in a marriage. Of course, women back then could not vote, couldn't own property. A lot of them, some of them couldn't get an education. So therefore, it was hard for a woman to walk away, unfortunately, in a bad marriage because they didn't have any financial resources or the power to do so. So they stayed in it. And some men benefited from that. Some men, not all of them, some benefited from that. However, they say women has made headway strong in their historical struggle with men. So you have a lot of women who have got their own money and their own power, where they don't have to deal with a marriage that's not, where they are dependent on someone. And conflicts, and I got a whole chapter on marriage and family, so I'm not going to get directly on just this marriage piece, but the conflict theories has a perspective. I'm going to get a little bit more detailed in a later chapter on marriage and family. But a lot of times women have their own money, and at this rate, okay, you want to walk away and leave? Fine. I can take care of the kids. I got money. This is my house anyway. So there's a different type of structure that's going on. And then me having a 19-year-old daughter, I'm definitely telling her, like, little girl, you're going to be powerful. You always got me taking care of you. He's always looking out for you. But at the same time, I don't want you to be dependent on no man to take care of you, and that you're able to take care of yourself. So if he walk out the way, your bills are still paid if he leave out the house. Compared to 100 years ago when women just had to deal with it and say, oh, I got to deal with this man. And I've met different women as throughout my years of teaching and just in life in general, where they say, oh, I want to leave this relationship, but I can't because I need to, he take care of me and the kids, and I just have to deal with this. But, from a conflict perspective, they just say this does not mean that marriage is weakened, but women are making headway, and it's a good thing in the historical struggle with men. The conflict theory, for instance, I'm just going to give you a small sample of more of what the conflict theory is. And I'm going to jump ahead to crime and delinquency. So the conflict theory would say that the laws are unevenly distributed. So if you have a CEO who put out faulty tires and the tires blow up and people died from it, 45 people unfortunately died from it, how much jail time is that CEO going to do? A rich, powerful CEO. More than likely maybe none, or if it is, it's in minimal supervision prison for a very short time, and that person may be fined a whole lot of money for that reason. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not getting into all the technical stuff. However, they saying for the poor, if a person was to rob a convenience store, they're going to do some hard time, whether they have a record. So they're just looking at the uneven distribution of power, stating that the persons in power come down harder on the poor. Because they appear to be a threat to society for them and their power, so therefore I'm going to keep them locked up. I'm going to get into that a little bit deeper, but I want to look for some more videos I can try to upload to kind of explain the conflict theory, symbolic interactionism, and the functions perspective to you so that you can have another perspective. These three different theories are going to be the main three theories that we're going to talk about throughout the book. There's going to be a lot of other different theoretical perspectives I'm going to use as well. I just want to give you a briefly about this. So for the exam purposes, I'm not just going out in left field. Give me an example of this conflict or is this. No, I'm not going out that route. I want you to have a good understanding of it. And I'm going to upload some more videos that you can learn about it as well. But I just want you to know the logistics of these three sociological theories. So remember that the functionist and the conflict theory, there's a macro level theory, the larger scale theory. They look at things on a broader scale. And then the symbolic interaction, remember they look at face-to-face interaction as a micro level, smaller level. So make sure you know that the function of conflict theory is at a macro level and the symbolic interaction is at a micro level. Also, this chart right here is very good because it helps explain more of the functions in conflict theory. Sorry about the dogs. So if we look at them real quick, the usual level of analysis for the symbolic interaction is the micro-sociological, examine small-scale patterns of social interaction. The focus of analysis, face-to-face interaction, how people use symbols to create social life, as we talked about. Some of the key terms for them are symbols, interaction, meanings, and definition. And they look at the divorce rate, industrialization, urbanization, changed marital roles, and led to a redefinition of love, marriage, children, and divorce. Functional analysis, also called functionalism, structural functionalism, macro-sociological perspective. Remember, that examines the large-scale patterns of sociology. Its focus of analysis is relationships among the parts of society, how these parts are functional, have beneficial consequences, or dysfunctional, have negative consequences. Key terms are structure, functions, manifest, and latent, dysfunctions, equilibrium. As social change, applying to the perspective to the U.S. divorce rate, as social change erodes the traditional functions of the family, family ties weaken and the divorce rate increases, as we talked about. And last, the conflict theories and macro-sociological perspective examines larger scale pattern of society, just as the functioners. Focus of analysis is the struggle for scarce resources by groups in a society, how the elites use their power to control the weaker groups. Key terms: inequality, power, conflict, competition, exploitation. And applying this perspective to the U.S. divorce rate, when men control economic life, the divorce rate is low because women find few alternatives to a bad marriage. As we talked about, the high divorce rate reflects a shift in the balance of power between men and women. So this is a good slide to use. Some of our students during lectures, they would take a picture of it, screenshot it, and just save it. But I did upload this into the PowerPoint presentations and as well discuss it in the video as well. So I think that is it. Let me see. I think that is it. Yeah. So pretty much this will conclude the video for chapter 1. Right behind this chapter is some different things on research, but I attached a different chapter 2 on research. So I'm uploading a chapter 2 based upon research as well. I'm not going to get too much deep into chapter 2 with that one. With research, I'm going to upload it as well. Make sure that everyone has a copy of it. So, but this is chapter 1, part 2. I didn't want to put all of them together because it had been over an hour, and I didn't want students like, oh no, this is an hour meeting, hour video I have to watch. So I broke them down to 2. So I don't want to overwhelm you with chapter 1. Remember, part 1 has to do with this introduction to sociology, definitions, the sociological thinkers, and then follow up with the applied basic parts of public sociology in the sociological theories. So this concludes today's presentation, and of course, if you have any questions, feel free to email me.